This is Demon Marked, Book 1 of the Venandi Chronicles, an urban paranormal romance series. Written by Sara Snow. Narrated by Selena Salcido and Henry Shader for Hot Ghost Productions. Chapter 21. Georgia. With the help of the vile coffee that they served employees at the call center, I was able to stay awake through the swing shift. The late-night callers were especially grouchy, and it was all I could do to keep from snapping back at a few of them. When the shift finally ended, I grabbed dinner from the snack machine, a package of cheese crackers and a candy bar, and headed for my car. I couldn't help thinking about the evening meal that Carter had described. The Venandi would have polished off the prime rib by now, and would be gathering upstairs to play pool, or heading to the library to read. Had I made the right choice by returning to my low-wage job? I could have been enjoying prime rib tonight, instead of gnawing on stale crackers. But, hey, at least these crackers were made with real cheese, according to the package. My trusty old car was waiting for me in the parking lot. I put my key in the ignition. The key turned, but the engine didn't respond. I turned the key again, but only got a useless click. Had I forgotten to fill the gas tank? Was my battery dead? Or was this a sign that my car was finally giving up on me? I leaned back against the driver's seat. At this point, I could have easily fallen asleep in the car. At least then I wouldn't have to worry about how I had gotten to work in the morning. My phone rang. My heart jumped when I saw a familiar number pop up on the screen.
Georgia, it's Carter. I know you haven't had much time to recover from our last debacle, but I've got a new mission for you.
Sweet adrenaline rushed through my veins. Instantly awake, I straightened up in the seat. What is it?
Eli and I have been tracking a group of changelings here in the city. You know what a changeling is, don't you?
I thought back to the books from Kingston's library. Changelings were the offspring of demons who were left as replacements for human infants that had been stolen from their cribs. A changeling is a junior demon, I said. They look just like humans, so the parents never know their children have been abducted. They just wonder why their sweet babies turned into evil brats overnight.
That about sums it up,
Carter said.
But we're dealing with the grown-up versions here. These changelings are continuing their work of abducting children and replacing them with their own spawn. They started an operation here in the city that fronts as an assistance program for low-income families. That's how they get into the humans' homes. They pretend to offer counseling and support, but as soon as mom turns her back on the kid, the changelings swap it out with one of their own.
Where do the human children end up?
That's what we've been trying to find out. Tonight, Eli made a break in the case. He tracked one of these demon do-gooders to a family's house in the projects, then followed it to an abandoned apartment building on the outskirts of town.
What happens to the human children?
The changelings sell them to high-level demons. Innocent souls are worth a pretty penny in the demon realm. Our mission is to destroy the changelings and get those kids out of there.
A cold ribbon of fear trailed down my spine. How are we going to do that?
You'll soon find out. Do you think this is something you can handle?
Stolen from their parents and taken to some cold, vacant apartment building. Those kids must be utterly terrified. In my mind's eye, I saw them huddled together, clinging to each other for comfort as they waited for a fate that they couldn't begin to imagine. I remembered how scared I had been as a child, facing a future that seemed to hold nothing but violence and abuse. I don't think I have a choice, I said. Where do I start?
That's my girl. I wouldn't have expected anything less from you,
Carter said. The satisfaction in his voice filled me with pride.
First, you need to meet up with Eli. He'll be waiting for you at the construction site, about a block from the vacant apartments. He'll fill you in on his strategy for invading the building and destroying the demon who's holding the kids captive.
Are you going to be part of this too?
Yes, but I'll be on the other side of town going after the adult changelings, while you and Eli attack the demon who's watching the stolen kids. Where are you now?
In the parking lot at work. Carter started to give me directions, but I interrupted him. There's one problem. My car won't start. I think the battery's gone dead. Carter paused for a moment.
Try to start it again.
I turned the key in the ignition and got that fatal click. Panic rose in my chest. Nothing. I can't go anywhere in this piece of crap.
Calm down,
Carter said.
Forget about using the key. Use your mind. Remember what Olympia taught you.
I took a deep breath and thought back to my session with Olympia. I closed my eyes, grasped the steering wheel with both hands, and willed my frantic brain to focus on the car's engine. I turned my thoughts into a river of energy flowing from my mind into the dead battery. I imagined the battery being charged by my power and coming to life again. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then turned over. My car started. I love you, you piece of crap! I cried into the phone.
Excuse me?
Carter laughed. Not you, Carter. My car! It's running again!
Of course it is. Now, let me tell you how to find Eli.
Eli was waiting for me in his own vehicle. A black Jeep parked outside the construction site. The beams of the half-finished structure rose like skeletal ghosts in the moonlight. Long sheets of plastic hung from the beams, flapping in the night breeze. I sat in my car and flashed to the headlights, reluctant to get out by myself in this neighborhood. After the events of the past few weeks, I saw demons lurking behind every street corner. Eli must have sensed my hesitation. He jumped out of the Jeep and strode quickly to my car. I pushed open the door on the passenger side, and he slid into the seat. No comments about my car, please, I said. I know it's a piece of junk, but it got me here. Eli raised his hands in self-defense.
Hey, that's all that matters. How are you feeling tonight? Up to slaying a demon?
If that's what it takes. I just want to save those kids.
And that's our goal. I assume Carter filled you in on their story.
He told me that these children were abducted by changelings through some fake public service agency. They're being held by a demon who's got plans to sell them to other supernatural beings in exchange for their souls.
You got it. But I assume he didn't give you much information about the demon himself.
No, he didn't.
That's good, because you probably wouldn't be here if you knew.
Eli eyed me, waiting for my reaction. I steeled myself for what he was about to tell me. "Go ahead," I said.
His name is Mammon. He's known in the demon realm for being a real son of a bitch who profits off the most vulnerable members of society. Kids, the elderly, homeless people. He'll stoop to any level to earn a buck, even abducting children and selling them off to the highest bidder among his demon friends. He's also known as a ruthless killer, who's willing to go to any lengths to protect his source of income.
Play it cool, Georgia. Just play it cool. I had the impression that he was some skanky, low-level demon. You make it sound like he's a genuine badass.
Hate to say it, but Carter played him down. Mammon is a badass. He's been known to flay his human opponents alive and sell their skins. I have to warn you, he's got a thing for pretty young females. He'll be trading you out to his friends for cash if we don't play this right.
That's reassuring, I said. I tried to keep my voice from shaking, but I wasn't very successful. What kind of shit was Carter trying to drag me into this time?
You sound scared.
Eli said.
And you should be. But I'll be right by your side.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Sounds to me like Carter is using those kids as bait to lure me into Mammon's lair. Does he think this demon is going to help him pay off a gambling debt or something? Eli stared at me for a second. Then he took my hand.
I know where you're coming from, Georgia. I come from the same hometown. It's a place where kids are betrayed by the adults they're supposed to trust the most. Parents, teachers, coaches. You learn to suspect every act of kindness because you've been taught that you don't deserve any better. You get to feel comfortable with being hurt because it's safer than taking the risk of being loved.
How is this an act of kindness? Carter's setting me up for another major injury. Maybe one that I won't recover from. Eli squeezed my hand hard.
We're giving you the opportunity to practice your power with someone who can protect you by your side. Believe me, Carter wouldn't be sending you into this nightmare if he didn't think you could handle it.
I looked out across the street at the spooky shadows that haunted the construction site. Could I ever expect to be normal again? Would I ever be the kind of person who was scared of everyday things, like catching the flu, instead of getting slaughtered by a demon? I don't know, Eli. I want to help those kids, but I don't know if I can. Could I drive the getaway car instead?
I'm not going to lie to you, Georgia. There's no safety net when you're slaying demons. But I will be there with you, fighting this monster. I will do everything in my power to make sure you don't get seriously hurt. Will you come with me?
I wasn't too reassured by the seriously hurt part, but I nodded. Are we going to have weapons? Eli handed me a hard object that was becoming all too familiar. A long, narrow rod with a sharpened tip. That's when I knew he was serious about not just harming this monster or saving its captives, but eliminating it completely.
I've got one too,
he said.
Now, let's go kick some demon ass.
The apartment building was a cavern of empty rooms. The doors of those cells gaped open, having released their human inhabitants long ago. As we crept down the filthy hallway, unseen creatures skittered in our wake. I would have liked to think that they were rats. That would have been more comforting than the thought of being watched by rodent-sized demons. Before we had even reached the floor where the children were being held, I heard their thin, plaintive cries seeping through the floor above our heads. The sound made me gasp. My heart clenched with the need to hold those small, shivering bodies in my arms. Eli raised a finger to his lips in warning. He pointed straight ahead to a stairwell at the end of the hallway, then straight up at the ceiling. I clamped my lips shut and nodded to show him that I understood. Along with those small cries, I heard the thudding footsteps of a much larger, heavier being. Those thundering footfalls reminded me of a fairy tale ogre who ate children alive. I wondered if Mammon had cannibalistic tendencies too. I trailed Eli into the dark, dusty stairwell. The space still smelled of ancient cigarette smoke, dried urine, and despair. Holes had been gouged into the walls, as if someone had punched the drywall in a drunken rage. Following Eli's example, I lifted each foot carefully before setting it down on the stairs. We were definitely not rushing this fortress. We were creeping in like night stalkers. Maybe it was because we were moving in slow motion, but the staircase seemed to go on forever. The highest stairs disappeared into the shadows above us, so I had no idea how many were left, and my thighs were burning from our slow ascent. Did Eli rock a stairmaster in his spare time? As we approached the top, the children's cries grew louder. I had no idea how many kids we were supposed to be releasing, or how old they were. But from the sounds they were making, I assumed they were all under 10. A door creaked above our heads. The cries turned into screams. I flashed back to a memory from childhood. 9 years old. I was living with my second foster family. The dad's name was Bob. I never actually saw his face, only the enormous, jagged shadow that he threw against the walls when he came home in the evenings. Then, the outline of his open palm raised to slap me for whatever sin I'd committed that day. Sneaking an extra glass from the fridge, forgetting to flush the toilet, breathing too loud. Wait till Bob gets home, then you'll catch hell, his wife used to say. And catch hell I did. Upstairs, the door thudded shut. Eli and I both froze. I couldn't see him clearly in the shadows, but I could feel the tension in his muscles. He was ready to spring. So was I. We ran up the rest of the stairs. I almost tripped over my own feet a couple of times, but somehow, I kept up with Eli. At the top, he didn't pause to check the hallway for a demonic ambush. He just raced down the hall, with me on his tail. I caught the number 696 on the apartment door, a second before Eli body slammed it. No safety net, I reminded myself. Just another day at the office, I guess. Then, I threw myself in after him. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it might knock me to the floor. I expected to see a hideous horned giant towering over us, ready to rip us apart. But the room was empty. A foul odor, like the stench of decomposing flesh, almost choked me. A sagging couch sat against the far wall next to a low table. On that table sat a half-empty glass and a plate of rotting matter. I didn't want to know what it was. Scraps of food and other debris littered the matted carpet. That loud thud we'd heard earlier had been terrifying. But this silence was 1,000 times worse. Eli's weapon was poised to strike, but with nothing to strike at, his hold on the stake relaxed. Why weren't the children crying anymore? Wind rattled the glass in the dirty windows. That was hardly anything unusual in Chicago, but something about this wind filled me with dread. It was a steady howl that grew in volume until it reached a deafening pitch. I clamped my hands over my ears. The iron stake fell out of my hands and clattered on the floor. Suddenly, the wind was no longer outside the apartment. It was inside, swirling around Eli and me, forming a vortex of wild chaos. My hair whipped across my face, and in the middle of that centrifuge, I couldn't reach up to pull it out of my eyes. I tried to scream Eli's name, but the wind sucked my voice away. I tried to focus my mind on stopping the whirling tunnel, but my power was no match for this cyclone. The vortex of the cyclone shifted and took on a new shape. A hunched form with massive shoulders and a hideous mask of a face stood in front of me. If I hadn't been paralyzed by fear, I would have been looking around for my backup. But I couldn't take my eyes off the demon. The demon was staring back. With fiery eyes, he scanned me up and down. His gaze burned holes in my clothes and scorched my skin. I could feel the dark energy of his desire, his greed for my body. Mammon. He was reaching for me, and like a mouse mesmerized by a predator, I couldn't move. A wild shout shattered Mammon's spell. Eli came flying at the demon as if he were falling from the sky. He wrapped his arm around the demon's thick neck and jerked it towards him. The demon pushed Eli away as easily as if he'd been a fly who landed on the demon's nose. That shove might have been casual, but it was enough to send Eli sailing across the room.
Back off, fucker. She's mine.
I was going to become the next rotting meal on Mammon's table. Eli scrambled to his feet. Crouched low, he rushed the demon, the stake extended in his hand. He plowed it into the demon's gut, releasing a wave of green fluid that hissed as it splashed the carpet. The demon roared with fury. With the stake still protruding from his belly, Mammon grabbed Eli like a rag doll and raised him over his head. I wasn't strong enough to move the demon with my mind, but I could move Eli. Mammon shifted his weight, preparing to fling Eli against the wall. I focused with all my might. Our lives depended on it. Eli's body sailed through the air again, but instead of smashing into the wall, he hovered just long enough to catch his footing as he fell. He tripped, righted himself, grabbed his stake from where it had fallen, and rushed the demon again with a battle cry. Eli and the demon fell to the floor. The sounds of their combat shook the vacant building as they rolled back and forth. Eli struck the demon with the stake, piercing his flesh again and again, but missing his heart. The demon easily outweighed him, but Eli was agile and muscular, and he was able to avoid Mammon's furious blows. Fluid gushed from the demon's gut wound, and as the bilious goo soaked the carpet, I could see the demon weaken.
Go find the children!
Eli shouted at me.
Hurry!
He continued to rush at Mammon's chest and belly, striking again and again with the stake. Mammon's roars of rage were subsiding into groans. His face was contorted into a mask of agony. He wouldn't last much longer, but he wouldn't die unless Eli could ram his heart full of iron. In the back of the apartment, the cries of the children rose again. I ran from room to room, searching for their source. Throwing open the door to the bedroom, I finally found them. Wide-eyed and weary, they stared at me from behind the bars of a cage. The cage nearly filled the tiny room, but it wasn't big enough to give the children any space to stand. Their small, defenseless bodies were huddled together in a clump of arms and legs. A feral smell surrounded the little prisoners. The smell of human waste mingled with fear. "It's okay," I whispered, walking softly towards the cage. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you. I'm going to get you all out of here." The children recoiled, but their hesitation held a promise that if I wasn't dangerous or scary, they might come to me. I crouched down beside the cage so that I was eye level with the group. I guessed that their ages ranged from 6 to 10. All of the kids were emaciated and dehydrated. Their eyes were huge in shrunken sockets, and their lips were dry and cracked. I held out my hand. The children stiffened, unsure what to expect. Was I going to reach through the bars to grab them, hit them? Or was I offering food and safety? "You're not my mom," said one of the boys. There was sadness in the statement, not accusation. "No, I'm not. But I'm here to take you back to your parents." I had assumed the cage would be locked, but it was only latched in a way that the children couldn't open it from the inside. I pulled the door open, and it broke my heart to see that the kids didn't move at first. As hellish as it was, their barred prison had also been their one source of safety. "Come on," I urged. "Let's go. We have to hurry." Slowly, the children separated from each other and began to crawl one by one out of the cage. Instead of standing and running, they continued to crawl across the floor. At the other end of the apartment, I heard the last grunts and gasps of Mammon and the rhythmic blows of Eli's stake piercing his flesh. Eli was keeping his promise to kick the demon's ass. Even though Mammon was dying, I wasn't about to let down my guard. I herded the poor, weak children through the rooms of the hellhole. A couple of the older ones were able to struggle to their feet to take the final steps out of their prison. The others crawled along behind them. When the older kids reached down to help the little ones wobble upright, my eyes stung with tears. "Let's go," "Come on," whispered the tallest of the boys. He led the parade of lost children toward the stairwell, while I followed, looking nervously over my shoulder. As long as I could still hear the sounds of Eli kicking demon ass, I felt okay. My next challenge would be to get all these kids down 6 flights of stairs. But that was nothing compared to the torture I'd release them from. Dawn was shedding a pale yellow light over the city when Eli and I returned the children to their parents. Some of them did not know where they lived, but the oldest of the boys remembered the houses that they lived in. On the day they were abducted, the changelings had driven from house to house, plucking the children like ripe peaches. This boy had drawn a map in his head that allowed him to guide us to each child's home. "You must be a superhero," I told the kid. "You have the power of GPS." He grinned with delight. I'd never felt anything like the joy that filled me when I returned each of the children to their parents. Watching those ecstatic reunions, I felt like I was doing something truly good for once, and my heart overflowed. We met up with Carter after the last of the 6 children had been returned to her overjoyed parents. It was almost noon, and though I'd been awake for over 24 hours, the adrenaline of the night still hummed through my veins. "You should have seen Eli whip that demon's ugly ass," I babbled. "It was epic! When that green guck gushed out of Mammon's stomach, I thought I was going to puke." Eli laughed.
Well, if you hadn't stopped me from slamming into the wall, I'd be toast. How did your night go, Carter? It wasn't quite so dramatic. I knocked off the changelings without too much effort,
Carter said lightly. I could tell by the shadows under his eyes that his task hadn't been all that easy. He had a bruise on his forehead and what looked like a bite mark on his cheek. Dried blood spattered his white collar. But he refused to describe the slaying for me.
Another day at the old grindstone,
he insisted.
You're the one who should be celebrating, Georgia. How about a drink?
Isn't it too early? Or too late?
Never. Where would you like to go?
How about the abyss? Carter and Eli stared at me for a second, before they caught my ghastly joke.
A fern bar might be more appropriate,
Carter said. What's a fern bar?
Never mind. That was before your time.
Carter chose a quiet, understated club that I might have considered boring if I hadn't been high on my accomplishment. That night had almost eclipsed the horrors of the car crash. I was starting to feel a tendril of confidence unfurling in my mind. Maybe I wasn't doomed to struggle with low self-esteem for the rest of my life after all. At the bar, Carter ordered a bottle of Veuve Clicquot and poured each of us a glass. Eli turned down the champagne, toasting me with his black coffee instead. He yawned as he sipped from the mug, and I realized that he was only hanging out with us to be polite. Before he made his excuses and left, Eli took my hand.
Congratulations,
he said, his eyes warm with pride.
You were awesome last night. That glow on your face makes me wonder whether the two of you were really slaying demons or enjoying some other hot encounter,
Carter said. I blushed. Seriously, Carter? Don't turn the night into a dirty joke.
He's just being a guy,
Eli said.
You know how we are.
He punched Carter affectionately on the shoulder and left the bar. Carter refilled my glass. The bubbles tickled my nose as I took a happy sip. Smiling, Carter watched me swallow the delectable champagne.
Be careful. This stuff will sneak up on you.
He was right. The tingly buzz was already warming my skin. But I wasn't in the mood for restraint right now. What's our next mission going to be? I asked. My toe collided with something solid under the table, and I realized it was Carter's shoe. If this were any other day, I would have moved my foot away. Playing footsie under the table seemed out of bounds in our relationship. But today, I wanted to push a few of those boundaries. Carter glanced at me. I couldn't tell if he had noticed my foot or not.
Be patient. You'll find out when it's time.
What if I don't want to wait? I rested my chin on my hand and looked up at him through my eyelashes. I remembered how he had devoured me with his eyes at the scene of the accident, his fangs jutting behind his lips. Funny how I felt more attracted to him now that I knew about his origins.
Then I'll have to teach you how to have patience. You could stand a little discipline.
No question now. He knew I was prodding his shoe with my toe. I lifted my foot and let it brush his ankle. He didn't move his own foot away, but he didn't return the nudge either. I know how to restrain myself when I have to, I said. I just don't choose to do that right now. That's why I'm drinking champagne in a bar with you, instead of sleeping off the night in my own bed. Carter gave me a stern look.
You really should be in your own bed, Georgia. You just successfully slayed your first demon. And you look exhausted.
Gee, thanks.
Let me revise that,
Carter said, his voice softening.
You look beautiful, but exhausted. You look like you need to rest.
I couldn't argue with him. The buzz of the champagne was starting to fade, replaced by a pleasant drowsiness. If the waiter came by and set a pillow down on the table, I could have easily dropped my head into its depths and fallen asleep. Then, Carter's foot lifted so that his toe was now resting on mine. He pressed it hard for a moment, long enough to let me know that he was aware of my clumsy attempt to flirt with him. He leaned forward.
Your room at the warehouse is waiting for you. Nice, soft bed. Fresh sheets. Heaps of those pillows that Olympia likes to fill the room with. What do you say?
He reached under the table to take my hand. Then he moved closer. So close that I could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I hadn't noticed that his eyes were slightly almond-shaped, like a cat's. His thick, brown hair and his clothes had a smoky scent. Did you burn those changelings to death last night? I asked, sniffing. You smell like you've been playing with fire.
I was playing with fire.
Carter admitted.
And I still am. We both are. Wouldn't you agree?
His hand moved to my knee. The firm weight of his palm made my thigh quiver. That would depend on which side of you is playing. Human or vampire. One corner of his mouth curved up in a sexy half smile.
I would say both. Definitely both.
I'm not sure I like the sound of that. I don't know if I'm in the mood to donate blood. His brown eyes widened, his pupils dilating. He was sitting so close to me now that his shoulder almost touched mine. His voice, when he spoke, warmed my cheek.
You don't have to be afraid of me, Georgia. The last thing in the world I want to do is hurt you. Quite the opposite. I would never take blood from you without your consent.
I gulped. From playing footsie to almost kissing, this conversation was moving faster than I had expected. I had started all of this, but now I had lost control of the flirtation. There was no backpedaling now. His lips brushed mine. I felt the hardness of his teeth through our near kiss, but no fangs. Maybe it really was his human side leading this dance. I leaned in to meet his lips. A vibrating buzz shook the table, shattering the moment. Carter sighed, glancing at the display on his phone. The desire I'd seen in his eyes turned into a look of concern.
I'm sorry. I have to take this call.
He pulled back, shoving his chair away from the table a little faster than I would have liked. That flicker of jealousy that I'd felt the other night flared in my belly again. Why had he stood up so abruptly? Why was he headed to the lobby to continue the conversation? Carter was smiling into the phone now, apparently enjoying whatever the caller had said. What if he was talking to that redhead right this minute? Or some other female creature, human or non-human, he had known in the past? After all, Carter was born in 1950. He had at least 50 years to accumulate girlfriends, lovers, maybe even wives. How did I know he didn't have a couple of ex-wives and a few mistresses stashed away somewhere? That could be an ex on the phone, calling to remind him to deposit her alimony payment. My tired brain was sending my imagination into overdrive. Carter was right. A nap would do me a lot of good right now. And if I was going to get any sleep, I needed to go to bed, alone. I looked up to see Carter standing over me. He held out his hand to pull me up from the table. That must have been an important phone call. I tried to keep the snark out of my voice, but I didn't succeed.
Yes, it was very important.
His expression was serious now. No more of that lover boy glow. But it's none of my business, right?
I don't know yet. Let's go. I'm taking you back to the warehouse.
He tugged me to my feet. From the strength of his grip, I knew better than to argue.